Welcome to Driven. I'm your host, Paul Perrone. We're going to learn and talk about AI, robotics, autonomous vehicles, and so much more. Check us out at driven.show on the web and give us a thumbs up or subscribe here if you like the show. So kick back or buckle up and become driven. Corey, good to see you.
Yeah.
It's been a while. Well, we saw each other not too long ago down in Florida, I believe, at the APTA conference.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of you recently because I'm going up to Detroit in a couple weeks, and I'm looking to book a place in Greektown. And I remembered that we had some. I got to remember the place if you can remember it. An awesome dinner at some place in Greektown after one of the first driverless. I think it was called the Driverless Car Summit. It was like the first driverless car summit.
Yeah, we did it at the Motor City Casino.
Yeah.
Yep. We actually, I helped put all that together way back 100 years ago. Yeah.
When was that? It was the first driverless car summit. I remember it was
2012. I'm completely guessing, but
yeah,
something around that time.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
So it seems like forever, but and it was
over 10 years. And then we met before that, right? I mean, we met on the X Prize project.
X Prize project, yeah, with Peter Diamandis and his crew. They were going to do an autonomous vehicle X Prize on the heels of the DARPA Urban Challenge, I think. Yeah, and that just never took off. I don't know what happened to that.
Well, you and I were a couple of the people that voted against it. Like it's been so long ago.
I voted for it.
Well, no, when we were kind of debating whether it was needed. We believed in the technology, but I think we came to a consensus as a team of advisors that X Prize wasn't needed to accelerate the investment and all the development for autonomous vehicles, which was, Peter's mission was he wanted to really kind of be an accelerator for technology that was important. And I think our conclusion as a group was that X Prize wasn't needed. It was already on a pretty rapid trajectory.
Oh, wow. See, I don't remember the conclusion, but I was for it 100% because I thought the the facet that they were going to do that was different from the Urban Challenge was to have like almost like an obstacle course for all kinds of different scenarios and situations that vehicles can get into, edge cases and what have you, coupled with like a cross-country trip, like a la Smokey and the Bandit, which I just thought would have been cool.
Yeah, I mean, we collectively, we kind of designed it, right, as an advisory team of what we thought would be important, but then ultimately,
but see,
just kind
now
of faded.
In retrospect, they should have had it because there's still edge cases, and and this was really, trying to speak to the commercialization effort. But of course, at that time, Google had their car. There was all the automotive OEMs were kind of rallying to get their technology put forward. But hey, I thought a challenge and an event and a race would have been fun.
Yeah,
but I'm a glutton for punishment.
Well, it just reminds me of when you just said that, the Indy Autonomous Challenge that's kind of, maintaining that theme and that inspiration. It's really a university challenge to kind of get students inspired and give them experience, but do it in a really cool format and setting. You can't beat working on autonomous race cars to help get you into the autonomous vehicle field. So I think it's a pretty neat program. I wasn't sure what their mission was at first and how important it was, but the more time I spent with them, the more I got it. I was like, oh, okay, this is really, about inspiring students to get into autonomy, and then secondarily to do some hardware testing, on LiDARs and the different sensor sets and things like that, onboard computers in a really harsh setting, a lot of vibration going 160 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's a cool challenge. It's a cool facet to that. And there've been other attempts and things along the way. I remember there was something called the Pikes Peak Challenge.
Yeah, yeah.
And I knew a group from Sun Microsystems at the time that was engaging in that, and where I guess they were just going to drive autonomously up Pikes Peak. I don't recall whatever happened to that event.
They did at least one. I don't know if they did more than one, but they did have one Pikes Peak challenge. I don't remember who won. I think Stanford was one of the competitors, but interesting challenge, of course.
Yeah. I don't think I could drive up Pikes Peak, but well, hey, it's thank you for agreeing to sit here today and talk a little bit. And I just wanted to, you've had an extensive career in autonomy. I mean, it certainly dates back prior to 2012 when we met. And actually, I think we actually crossed paths at some of those like early robo business conferences. Do you remember those?
Yeah,
those were even earlier. So you've been sort of a fixture in the autonomy and the robotic space for a while, and I've been doing this for 20 years, as you know.
Yeah.
And so we've had the opportunity. So just a little bit about your background. I know you were you were in the United States Marine Corps.
Yeah.
You did some work with Tardec that in the Army that we'd love to hear more about. You've been involved with startups and Stantec and different companies over the years, and have just had just a broad perspective of autonomy that I think is fascinating. So I don't know if you want to just tell for everybody here, like in a nutshell, how did you get started in all this, and how did you get from point A to point B, as robots have to figure out?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I started my career with 10 years in the Marine Corps. Started as an enlisted guy, and with the intent to become a jet pilot. And it was kind of funny because I was on an academic scholarship at a university in Michigan, and a university in Michigan, not the University of Michigan. So I was bored. My goal was to finish school and become a fighter pilot. And so I started talking to the recruiters after the first semester, and I got hooked in the Marines. I just really connected with those guys and told them what my goals were. And of course, the recruiter is going to tell me this great path to follow that starts with enlisting, right? But I bought it. I was like, oh, well, I can get this scholarship. I can get another scholarship program through the military, and et cetera, while having fun and having adventures. And so I signed up after my first semester, my freshman year, and I went home and told my mom, who was a single mom, raised us, and told her that, hey, I joined the Marine Corps. I enlisted in the Marine Corps. And she was so mad at me. She's like, you are the stupidest smart kid, and she's like, you have to figure out how to get out of this. I'm like, no, it's going to be great. He told me I can do all these things. And then jump forward, I actually did exactly what we mapped out in the recruiting office of, getting the different scholarship programs and going to officer candidate school and making it to flight school and all of those things. But the strange thing is, once I got into flight school, I found out I didn't really like it that much. It was a childhood dream, and the repetition just wasn't for me. I just got bored. And it wasn't as spiritual as I thought it would be, soaring through the clouds. It was, and so after 8 years active duty, I got out, put my engineering degree to work in Michigan, which is where my wife and I grew up. Joined the legions of automotive engineers, but really kind of quickly got more into program management and project engineering because it just suited me more. And I think I was a little older from getting out of the Marine Corps, and I had good leadership skills and project management skills. And so I started doing that, finished my master's degree, and I just started to gravitate towards innovation. And so I started doing like innovation consulting around the Detroit area after I got my MBA, and kind of got to be known at some of the bigger companies. And then just through a networking chance, I ran into some folks from Tardec, from Booz Allen, that had an innovation project at Tardec. And
so what's Tardec stand for, if you can remember?
Let's see. Tank Automotive Research Development Engineering Command, or Engineering Center. That's what it was.
And what's their mission? Yeah.
It was basically it wasn't just an Army mission. It was Department of the Army, but it was really a DoD wide, and it was all of the research, development, and engineering for ground vehicles for the Department of Defense. Of course, based in the Detroit area, right next door to General Motors Tech Center. They formed it right after World War II, I think, and the perfect place for it. And I think it's changed its name now. Now I think it's the Ground Support Center, something like that, but still with the same mission. And yeah, so anyway, so I started working for Booz Allen. The typical innovation consultant job. I was supposed to bounce around, a dozen different areas within Tardec. They had survivability and they had sustainability, robotics, a bunch of different things. And the first project they asked me to do was help the robotics team create a long-term strategy. So we kind of did it a little different. I looked at the templates, the typical military, the template for a long-term strategy, and it was so boring. And I was asking the director of the robotics group, which you probably knew, Jim Overholt. Do you remember Jim?
Oh, yeah, I do.
So I was asking Jim, I'm like, what do you do with this once you get it done? He goes, it's going to go back on the shelf. I was like, let's do something more meaningful. And so we started talking, and I said, what if we act like you're a startup company, and we really try to look at this in a little more innovative way, just even developing your strategy, your research and development strategy. And he loved the idea. And so that's what we did. We did it in a more agile way using, kind of current methodology. A lot of them coming out of Stanford, right? Like good to great types of things. So we created the strategy, and I was like, this is it. I love this. This is what the military has to focus on. And I stayed there. And it was kind of funny because it was maybe a year and a half later, the director came to me and she said, Corey, I hired you to go around and help all of my leaders, in each different division. And she goes, you're not supposed to be in my robotics, division forever. And I convinced her to let me stay. And I was like, I disagree. I said, this is it. This is your moneymaker. This is our future. And you need to put as many resources as you can in this, in ground-based robotics or autonomy. And so she reluctantly said, okay. And I stayed there for almost 7 years, and created, really helping to execute the strategy we created.
And how did Tardec? There was something called Future Combat Systems at the time that I remember. And that was like a mission to have a certain number of either unmanned or automated combined, I don't know, vehicles. You can tell us more, by a certain year or something like that. And how did those two relate? Did one spawn the other, or were they collaborating?
Tardec supported that mission. And so what was kind of interesting, what we came out of that with this, kind of a strategy with Jim, was they were going to keep investing in the really hard technology, autonomous technology that's truly level 5, to be able to go at high speeds off-road, potentially hostile environments. So, I mean, that's a level 5, right? I'm not, if we're in a constrained area in a city, just because it's operating fully autonomy, I'm not sure that's a level 5 with all of the constraints of society. If you take it out into the military, out into the field in a hostile environment, that's a really hard problem to solve. So we knew that was a 20-year problem, and that there needed to be a lot of investment and a lot of work to get there. So what Jim was really also interested in is, could we work on the short-term things, like that were low-speed constrained environments, non-hostile, very, very repetitive tasks, the dull, dirty, dangerous, and could these simple autonomous applications inform the hard ones over time? And so that was our goal, and that the program that we created was Aribo, and I've just renamed our company Aribo, kind of as an honorarium to Jim at some level, because Jim passed away a few years ago from cancer, and I just hated to see it be dead. We worked our butt off on that project, and had global recognition. We were part of a Global Cities Challenge. We presented it at the White House. And so to see it dormant was just driving me crazy. So Katie and I grabbed the name, and we're using the Aribo brand for our projects now.
Katie also, being your daughter, right? Is that
yeah? My daughter
that must
and
be
partner.
great working with your daughter. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I keep on trying to convince Luca, my son, to help me out here down on the lab on occasion, but he's got this app called Greenlight where he wants to be paid for everything. So
I don't blame him. I think we do too, right?
Yeah. It's important, right? To be as we all know, when we've seen it in the autonomy space, to be a successful autonomy company, revenue is kind of important.
Yeah.
We've and that's been tough for a lot of autonomy companies, which is another topic. But just coming back to Tardec real quick, like it's so was the mission, I guess, was the objective to create technology and sort of have the Army or the DoD build it, or was it to just sort of work with companies who were eventually going to sort of take, I don't know, how does that even work? Ownership or whatever of the IP or the ideas and build it out. How does that work in a group like Tardec?
It was really to work with industry.
Okay.
And to invest in the technology and invest in industry to essentially create products for the Department of Defense. And
okay.
And what our strategy was really designed to do was to help accelerate that. And that's the Aribo program was really about collaboration. So we were collaborating with universities and cities and a lot of autonomous companies and developers and researchers. But it was really an interesting project in that we worked with different cities and transit agencies, which was very different. They've never done that before. Like there was we found projects that were going on globally, and one of our first ones that we collaborated with was called the Gateway Project in London. I don't know if you ever had awareness of that or saw that.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, it was on the Greenwich Peninsula, and they were doing early pilots with the autonomous shuttles. The first one that came out of Induct and the predecessor to the Navia, and so they were running trials there, and then they did a second phase with a UK company. Eventually, it was called Westfield, but it's the same company.
Right, that's what I've heard of that. Yeah,
yeah, they do that pod, PRT system at Heathrow. So the same company did that, and then they dabbled with a little bit of robotic delivery on that campus, but we were teamed up with them. We were really trying to collaborate, but we were collaborating with many different federal agencies too. So we were the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, NASA, and the intent was we were all going to share resources, both money and expertise. And but of course, that's not always that easy. That was a lot of my role. I was kind of that program manager, strategist guy that I would help build the teams, but then just manage all of that. It was like, okay, we can all collaborate, but we got to find more money, or we got to, who can chip in here, and who can bring this technology, and who can bring this system, and it was really cool.
So is it taking sort of like needs, sort of perceived and identified needs for the DoD, and trying to see if these other organizations can build it out? So like in that case, like working with a UK company, how does that transfer back to the US DoD?
Part of it was, one is working with the companies out there. If they were just market leaders and industry leaders, technology leaders, the Department of Defense wants to know about it and wants to potentially at least try it, if not buy it.
Okay.
So that's what we were looking for, was really early innovators. And then those types of projects, we need data, right? I mean, you go through that a lot still, is that, data from autonomous operations is just gold. I mean, anything we can learn, we can put to work. And so that was part of it as well. That's why we were collaborating on just about any project that we thought was a nice fit, and why we why we were finding things like the Gateway project that was a low speed shuttle in a constrained environment is because one thing we did was a needs analysis for the Department of Defense and base operations. And that was one of the things that kept popping up, is that bases were having a really tough time moving people around the base.
Right.
Is that they had this weird thing, is that they could buy hardware, they could buy buses, vehicles all day long. They didn't have budget for people, so for the drivers. So they were excited. Some of the base operations leadership was excited about the idea of autonomy because they couldn't figure out how to increase their budgets for more drivers. And they were, they would have contractors or things like that. And every now and then they'd have to borrow drivers from the Army or the Marine Corps, and they hated that. It's like, they didn't want to be a bus driver. They didn't join the Marines or the Army to drive people from the barracks to the chow hall,
Right.
And so those were some of the applications we were looking for. So if we found things that had some kind of a connection or a parallel application, we wanted to learn about it and see if we could support in some way.
Yeah. Interesting. And so was that your first sort of exposure to the low speed shuttle? I call them bespoke because they're kind of custom shuttle applications and possibilities.
We brought over that early induct Navia vehicle and ran it around a few military bases as pilots and learned a lot about it.
Was that that was the first of these kind of bespoke autonomous shuttles that you've been working on? But you've had a fascinating career with a lot of different companies, but also you were involved with a company I thought had an awesome design and an awesome concept. Obviously, I have some personal feelings for it because I worked with them too. But the Local Motors Ollie was just I thought a beautiful looking vehicle.
Thank you.
So tell me let's just talk a little bit. How did you come to, and maybe you had another route to get to Local Motors, but since we're talking about these shuttles, that project.
Yeah, it all connects pretty well because we were running around the Induct Navia, which was kind of an open air vehicle. It had a roof, but didn't kind of have sides on it. And that was created really for high pedestrian areas in and around Paris. And so when we brought it over and we were running it around military bases, it worked great. We never had one issue with it running autonomously. It never got stuck. It never seemed confused. It never had a safety issue. And I think we worked with it for, I don't know if it was 2 years or a year, 2 years. I'm not sure what the timeline was. But we supported them with some of those external demonstrations and pilots as well. We ran it around Facebook for a week. We took it to Disney for a demo, all kinds of stuff. I mean, the vehicle worked. And that was actually my daughter Katie's first, that was her introduction to autonomy, is she took a gap year when she was in college. And between her sophomore and junior year, she was the demo manager for Induct and was the person actually operating the vehicle at all of these demonstrations. And so moving forward, we had an Aribo booth at the Detroit Auto Show 2014. Maybe it'd be like the very beginning of 2015, I think. And next to our booth was a Local Motors booth. And a mutual friend introduced Jay Rogers, the CEO, and us. He said, you guys both work in innovation and vehicles, and you really like cool transportation, and you're both Marine Corps officers. I think you guys will like each other. So he went for a ride with us and said, man, this is the future. This is amazing. Corey, come and work for us. Come and build an autonomous program for us. And I started early 2015 at Local Motors, and it was the intent to build an autonomous vehicle, and we decided to start with a shuttle. And they had a really interesting model in the way that they did design competitions, and we picked that one out of a design competition, Ollie,
So explain
And
that for people who aren't as familiar. Locomotors was doing a lot with 3D printing, and they had like a giant
yeah,
3D printing machine maybe that was later down the road. But was that the
no,
concept to
well, it
kind of make
wasn't.
sure?
We weren't actually looking necessarily to 3D print Ollie at the
Okay.
beginning. Not necessarily. Like we wanted to take advantage of it and figure out when was the right time and how to incorporate 3D printing into Ollie. But backing up to the auto show, they did something really amazing. Is they brought the 3D printer to the Detroit Auto Show, and they printed the Stratty on site and built it and drove it away, which was, for me, I just love creativity and innovation, and I just thought, man, these guys are just wild. They're wild men and women, and I love it. And so it wasn't that hard for Jay to get me to come over, and it was also great. They just pushed all my buttons. When I showed up to meet the leadership team and kind of have a final interview, they picked me up in one of their rally fighters at the airport, bright orange. And I don't if you look up Locomotors rally fighter, anybody kind of Googles it or looks for videos, it was essentially an off-road race car. Was their first vehicle product, and then their second vehicle was this 3D printed little convertible, which was just insane that you could
Yeah.
3D print something. I think it had, if I remember right, it seemed like it was less than 100 components to make the vehicle work, or maybe it was less than 200. But it was a challenge, but they printed and assembled it at the auto show.
Now, not everything was 3D printed, right? I mean,
No, just
obviously.
basically the body.
Yeah.
So the body, it is essentially just a shell. I mean, the frame, the body were all kind of just one piece, all printed together, and then and everything else was bolted on. It was pretty fascinating. So
Yeah, yeah. And then, so the Ollie, when it was conceived, the idea was conceived that you said that was a design competition to kind of
yeah,
create the design,
yeah.
and but the 3D printing wasn't yet part of its
I think,
manufacturing method.
yeah, I think we did components. Like I think the wheel wells were the first thing, and then they evolved, and actually it was the chassis, the
Yeah.
underbody side, essentially the lower half was then 3D printed after a while. So it was still new technology. It was really, really interesting and innovative. And so that's one thing about Locomotors, is that the innovation that came out of Locomotors was fascinating to me. It was good.
I really like the idea, and I don't know why, and it's just maybe an idea that was ahead of its time that will eventually happen.
Yeah,
But the concept that we can, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at least this is what I got from part of the mission of Locomotors, was to create methodologies for manufacturing in smaller facilities, such
yeah,
that you could distribute them across the country, and you can have local manufacturing, like any town
yeah,
USA or wherever in the world could have a facility, maybe leveraging 3D printing, which sort of in some ways democratizes or makes more accessible the capabilities of manufacturing
mhm,
something, but in anywhere in the world. And I thought that was really just a wonderful concept, because it could bring economic benefits to towns that otherwise wouldn't have them, across
yeah,
the country and the world. And I thought that was really fascinating. So that was part of the
yeah.
mission, right? And
That was the primary part of the mission, was that, which is why the name was the name.
yeah,
Locomotors was to be
Locomotors.
a local vehicle manufacturing facility, which is, I mean, that's also just a bold idea. I mean, you know, how many people decide to just manufacture vehicles? I mean, there's been just a handful in the last 20 years, beyond all of the big OEMs. So
Right,
it's
right.
pretty bold of Jay, and then Jay taking it to the next level, because they started with kind of a kit car, was the rally fighter, and then when they did all the research and saw how large scale additive manufacturing was coming online, he became an expert in that really quickly, and incorporated that. and I think what you said is probably was too early, because that technology, like autonomy, it's just on such a rapid development curve, and we were really, really early. So, you know, material was kind of expensive. The material was heavy. There was a lot of testing that had to still be done on destructive testing and things like that. But it was still a cool idea. It was great for, the little Stratty was almost like a fancy golf cart, and the Ollie, the same thing. It was a 20 mile per hour vehicle. So for things like that, could be viable.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to see. I mean, I hope that Jay and others, just keep going, right? Because we need that persistence, and because bringing manufacturing to the local level would certainly be a boon for the economy, and not just manufacturing of vehicles, but other things, right? Yeah. So, and leveraging 3D printing to do it, which is just another disruptive kind of technology that's happening concurrent with autonomy and AI and all these other things. And there may be the convergence of those, but there's also still just the concept of 3D printing for local manufacturing could have, much broader benefits and implications if people just keep going, and keep doing it. And I don't quite know, but I think Jay is doing something in that regards right now.
He is. He has a 3D printed furniture business.
Okay.
He actually lives really close to me. Now that we moved away from Michigan, we live in Tampa area. He lives in St. Pete, which is also in the Tampa area.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. So I guess we were talking about Tardec and kind of, I guess, obviously some of that technology you've talked about how it's shaped your approach to innovation in this space a little bit. What are just, you've been, working with autonomous vehicles, just sort of, broadly speaking, some insights into autonomous vehicles over the past, whatever it's been, 15 or more years.
15 years, yeah.
15 years. And maybe talk a little bit about this analogy that you made to me at a recent conference that I thought was interesting, to like the start of the automotive industry and the different organizations, the Dodge brothers and groups that were sort of coming along, and how that's analogous to some of the things that are happening in autonomy. I mean, just your perspective and thoughts on that, I think, would be interesting for people to hear.
Yeah, sure. What I really like to focus on, and this was all the way back to the Tardec days and all the consulting I've done since, because I was only at Local Motors for just under 2 years. So I essentially helped create the concept of Ollie and helped them take it to prototype, and then I was back to consulting again. And so the perspective comes from, we were adding it up. I've worked with over 30 different companies in the autonomy space of all types, startups to OEMs, and on over 60 projects now. So, and what I like are projects that can be deployed, scaled, which essentially means that they have a technology use case and a meaningful application and a business case. So that's kind of what we try to focus on now, with also hopefully inspiring the next generation of vehicles that maybe they're a little too expensive today, but in 5 years the business case is going to work. So we still have to put energy into those things, but in the meantime, what we really try to focus on are things that have a business case today, and so it could be relatively small applications. It could be cutting the grass, or security, perimeter security, or delivery. We just met with a really cool drone delivery company in San Francisco, or not drone delivery, but a drone security company, and I'll tell you about that. But anyway, so that's kind of my overall philosophy. So we don't do a lot with robotaxi. If I get asked to help in some way, we're always happy to help if we can bring value. but I think the robotaxi companies are well funded and well staffed, and they probably don't need our help that much. And so we tend to focus on more utility applications. We do work a little bit in the public sector and transit, but it's the same thing. It's usually if we get asked. What we're really pushing are those utility applications for, industrial campuses, logistics campuses, airports, military bases. So even after all these years, because we are still not even remotely deployed at scale, that's still what I want to help, really get out into the market first.
Gotcha. And so, well, that's where you're saying, yeah, now where you kind of sit now, but I guess is kind of going back over those 15 years, there's been there's automotive autonomy, robotaxis, as you've talked to. There's things going on in the transit space. Like what of these other, is there a way that you categorize sort of the different sort of autonomous vehicle industries and activities out there, and ones that are going to be much further out there than others? Yeah. And because it sounds like the geofenced utility type applications are more where you think the business case is right now. Yeah. But what of these other spaces, that, because we hear a lot about the Tesla, we hear about robotaxis with Cruise and Waymo and what the auto companies have been doing. Mm-hmm. Even there's activities going on still with these bespoke shuttles, right? Like with Holon and Zoox and things like that. What do you think of those different industries? Yeah. Are they further out there? Trucking, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, that's such a big question, because you listed so many things, and every one of those applications is so unique. If we start with where the biggest investments have gone into robotaxis, I think they're going to figure it out. And I think Waymo is well ahead. I'm really curious about what Apple's doing. But then we in the States don't have as much awareness of what's happening in China, but I think that I keep hearing about a lot of vehicles on the road, a lot of autonomous vehicles on the road. So we just started talking to a couple Chinese companies, so we'll have more awareness there. But I love that they're all, that the big companies and the big thinkers and the big innovators are still pushing hard, because they believe that is our future model for transportation of like robotaxis. So think it's great. We don't participate in it that much. We dabble every now and then. There's a little project here or there that we get involved with, but I'm glad they're doing it. And I think it's unfortunate of what happened to Cruise, and I think all of these companies. One thing, I'm gonna deviate a little bit from just the technology and kind of innovation strategy discussion. Is one thing, I'm getting old now. I've got grandkids and kids in my 30s and grandkids. And it's always about people. We love the tech and we love the innovation, but these companies succeeding and failing usually is more about the people and the leadership teams, and not even saying that a company fails because there's a bad leadership team. It's just decisions that were being made, or personalities. I know a handful of autonomous companies that have gone out of business just because of personalities and just because leadership teams were fighting. So it's really tough to criticize some of these things, or we see what's in the media. Here's one of my generalizations: is generally what I see in the media is wrong, based on experience. You probably have some of that as well. I've been quoted in articles incorrectly. I've read articles and it's like, this isn't what happened. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate, is with all of the projects that we've done, is we have pretty deep insight into a lot of the companies and a lot of the projects that have, the successes and the failures that we've all had over the last 15 years. And the media usually isn't even close to what actually happened. So anyway, that's just robotaxi. You listed eight other things.
Yeah,
Trucking, I
well,
think trucking's coming online, is coming aggressive. There's big money behind it because there's big money because there's a big business case and it's needed. So I'm a
but where
fan
do you
of
think,
it.
like, I mean, everybody always asks the, crystal ball question, but um, robo taxis, much further out there for
Yeah,
production, driverless use, like 5 years,
yeah,
10 years,
yeah.
1 year.
It's hard to say.
No,
I would guess 3 to 5 years is my guess, with 5 years
no.
feeling more comfortable. Um, but I wouldn't be surprised if Waymo surprises us. It's essentially this way I feel. I just think Waymo is really, no company's perfect, no tech is perfect, but the amount of investment and the amount of miles they're putting on, and I was just in San Francisco and I saw 20 of them running around. It's just that glimpse of the future is fascinating. But there's a handful of companies that are competing in that space. But yeah, I would say I think 5-ish years probably. But I don't think we're going to see all of this autonomy really taking over, like the vision that we all have of like it really starts to reduce accidents on the road and all that stuff for 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the problems is, I guess with robotaxis, just to talk about that for one moment, is um, a lot of investment, a lot of very smart people. There might even be, the correct decisions being made along the way, even, and with enough money, you can make wrong decisions and course correct. But you can, there are so many, situations that these vehicles can encounter
Oh yeah.
that and there's a lot of companies using things like neural networks, which are not predictable. They're great, right? But they're not. You can't predict. You can't. I should say they're not deterministic, right? You can't certify or know what they're going to do, or describe the decisions, how they came to the decision. There's work being done in that, but you can't describe how it came to this decision. So if it makes the wrong decision, you can't really describe why it did, because it's just a bunch of weights in a network, numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have one accident, right? And it might not even be due to the vehicle. Going back to the press and the media, the headline is autonomous vehicle gets into accident.
Yeah.
It may
Yeah.
be due to somebody being thrown in front of the vehicle, or someone driving whatever. There might be a malicious event. There could be something bad going on behind the scenes. It could be the underlying vehicle platform and not the autonomy itself, right? Something could have happened with the car, right? A lot of people
Yeah.
are using new and novel vehicle platforms,
Yeah.
right? They're not always using, cars that we drive every day. They're using new electric platforms and these shuttle platforms that are new. So
Yeah.
there's the bathtub curb for failure modes with those, right?
Yeah.
So, but the headline, autonomy, vehicle collides with something, and then it's, it could set Waymo back. It could set any of these companies back, like it did Cruise dramatically,
Yeah.
right?
And
And
Uber. I mean, Uber
and
was investing heavily, right?
and
Before
who?
that big accident. Uber.
Oh, right, yeah, Uber, of course. So, um, I agree with you. I mean, could be 5 to 10 years, but something's got to change, or there's got to be an understanding culturally about what we can accept, an understanding that today that maybe wasn't as much of a big issue when the Wright brothers were first, and we were
Yeah.
first learning to kind of launch planes into the sky, right? There were a lot of accidents earlier in the early days, but there's just, I don't know what it is. It's just, there's just more access to information faster,
Yeah. Yeah.
and in such depth that people don't even understand, the ramifications of that. But it's affecting businesses, and maybe in a positive way. But I'm just saying it's affecting. It's going to make it. To me, what that means to me, good or bad, is it's going to push the time frame for robo taxis and
Yeah.
and consumer grade autonomy out many years. It could be decades.
Yeah. It could be. Yeah. And that's which is why I focus
Yeah.
on things that are more isolated. The things that people don't they won't even realize, if it's a robot is moving a piece of cargo at an airport, we don't care, right? As long as it's safe, and it doesn't hurt anybody, within its environment or hit anything and cause any damage, we're happy about it. But yeah, I agree with you. It's really interesting to see this evolution, and it kind of back to what we were talking about before of how aviation started and how the automotive started and how wildly different it was, but also how similar it was as well. What we were talking about is I did a little research. I was just kind of curious, and I think I wrote a blog post or something about it. Is being growing up in Michigan, everybody's in the automotive industry back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up. And, and then gosh, I don't know what the numbers are, but it felt like it decreased about 75% in the 80s with all the layoffs and plants shutting down. But that was still our world, was this automotive world. And doing the research, I was trying to think of my network is really strong, and I was trying to think of how, all of these people that I've met, like yourself, throughout the years that have gone to the different companies, AV companies, some within the Department of Defense, and then a lot of them, startup companies that have been acquired, and on and on. And it just was really similar to me as the start of the automotive industry, and I didn't realize how much overlap and cooperation, coordination, collaboration there was in those early days. It was like Buick worked for was it the Buick? It's like the Dodge brothers worked for Henry Ford for a while, or for Oldsmobile for a while. Then they split off and did their own thing. And then, Buick was the same way. And then General Motors bought them. But they were all in this tiny little area in Michigan, and they all knew each other because the Dodge brothers were, building suspension for Oldsmobiles, for 5 years, and then started their own company. But there was so much of that, and there's a lot of it still within our industry. I mean, we all know each other, right? It feels like a small industry, and I'm just fascinated by that. I like knowing, I've known you for, gosh, it's been like 12 years. To me, it seems like the time frame is this much, and I can't believe how fast time goes. So just fascinated by all that.
I know. Well, things will just, I mean, today things, as we know, happen. It's the singularity concept, right? Things happen at an exponential pace. Moore's law applied to many different things, just at an accelerated pace because of the technology that we have that from AI and from other, other industries. Batteries becoming more compact and longer range, although that's not happening as fast as we'd like, but that's unleashing, more processing power. It's unleashing the capability of mobility. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, some of these autonomous vehicles that we looked at, well, maybe even in like 2015, that, you would open up a trunk and they'd have it would look like a trunk full of supercomputers, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not going to be commercial anytime soon.
Yeah.
But with Moore's law and just things getting smaller and more energy efficient, that you're able to do much, much more. And now with generative AI, which is a whole other topic, it's just accelerating things at a whole other level. So interesting, I guess. So what are some of the major sort of challenges in your mind that currently face these, autonomy companies today?
Yeah.
Like why are so many companies, why have some companies not made it? Why are some companies, persisting, or in new companies, arising? What challenges are facing that make this so difficult?
It feels
in your opinion.
Yeah. It's always cash. Cash flow is one of the foundational issues. Is that, I've been in that space too. Is that we're overly optimistic about the development cycle and how long it's going to take us to get to a commercially viable product, and how expensive it's going to be to get there. If we predict it's going to take 3 years and it takes 5, we're running out of money.
So does that come back to, so if it's cash now, and of course some companies had a lot of cash,
mm-hmm.
a lot of cash, right? Billions invested.
It goes back to the people thing. I mean, we're flawed humans, right?
Yeah.
And that's, so that's happening a lot, is that people are just overestimating. I mean, like ZF just pulled out of their autonomous shuttle building and kind of out of the autonomous game. And I think it was kind of the same thing, as they were doing growth models, and their original projections weren't being met. This is a guess. I'm not, I don't have inside information there, but I'm just guessing, is that as they continue to mature and learn more about the industry, and that it just wasn't going to meet their initial expectations for the investment. And but that's happening off and on, with some of the larger companies and the bigger investments. The small companies are, it's not easy to get investment, and they can run out of cash. But one thing, there was kind of a couple things in that question. One, you're asking about some of the challenges that the companies are having. I was thinking also about some of the challenges that we're having as an industry as we start to deploy. And that's some of the things that we're focused on, because we have 15 years of experience of we can just say, of making mistakes and trying to correct those mistakes from a program management and strategy viewpoint. Is that one thing that I'm finding with the small number of end users that are those innovators and early adopters, the people that are likely your clients, is they don't have a clue what autonomous vehicles are or what it takes to deploy them. So that's part of our mission, is we're trying to educate them. And like airports is a great example. I can get an airport operations person up to speed pretty quickly, because so many of even the innovators and early folks think that buying one of your autonomous vehicles is just like buying any other bus, and it's not, right? You need solid network connection. You have to have a safety driver for a while. You have to have good 3D maps, and on and on and on. There's 100 things to make your system work, and a million things probably. But when I talk to an airport, I can talk to them about their automated people movers. And I say, you've got to don't think of it like the bus you bought last year. Think of it like your automated people mover, and the amount of systems engineering that is needed to support this. Like, you have to have the proper networks. You have to have some infrastructure tweaks. You have to have remote supervision. You have to have redundancies and everything, and et cetera. And they get it. But that's one of the challenges as well. Is that there's a steep learning curve even from the end users and operators.
Right.
In these early days, eventually it'll be like the elevators, right? It'll be, you get on and push the button and it goes, but that's, decades away. Maybe not in my lifetime, but that's where we'll eventually get, is that the autonomous vehicle can just handle all of it. But there's a lot of human intervention right now.
Yeah, interesting. I think, definitely the understanding what the requirements are for a particular environment, like the ODD, right? As people refer to it, operational design domain, and the requirements for it, like what autonomous capabilities are needed, and the capabilities of a particular, company or version of product. Are they, is there a match there? And so sort of matching that, because you're right, people, are, some organizations, some folks might be purchasing these things thinking, I'm buying like not just, it's like a Roomba but a much larger version, and you just press a button and it goes. Although my early versions of the Roombas never worked, but they now work great. So congratulations to iRobot. It's a wonderful company. But with these autonomous vehicles, there's got to be, I think, some sort of I think standards will help with like creating taxonomies of
Yeah.
ODDs and sort of helping bridge the gap between what the end user's needs are and what the AV provider and the technology providers have, right? And so that comes together. It's one of the things that I worked a little on with the SAE. As you know, they have a standards committee in this space, and they've certainly been working towards things like that. But I think that to have that become more pervasive and more well adopted, I think will go a long way personally to bridging the gap and the different languages that the end user and sometimes the AV companies speak with regards to this technology, and will help growth. But
we're trying to do kind of a taking it to the streets kind of thing. So when you mentioned SAE, our mutual buddy Andy Smart, was former CTO, and I probably, when you started on those committees to help develop standards for autonomy. But Andy and I have been working together for years, and he just finished an airport's requirements and standards document for Toronto Airport, and I think it's going to be a model for all of us. But it's exactly what you're talking about. It's now we have requirements and standards model and template that we can use throughout. And, of course, Andy is so comprehensive in his standards evaluation, and so it's a really quality document.
Well, interesting. So you were involved with Stantec for a while, and you created this interesting concept called GenerationAV. Can you talk a little bit about the story behind that idea and what its objectives and sort of achievements were, and sort of how you might be leveraging that?
Yeah, I'm still doing it. It's essentially was taking what I was doing, in this little micro model of helping to build tools for planning and deployment of autonomous vehicles, kind of the same stuff we've just been talking about for the last 10 minutes, but packaging it. So there, we have processes that can be shared and taught. And my idea was that a big company like Stantec, a big global company, consulting engineering firm, could essentially take what I was doing and scale it. So in the simplest terms. And so it was actually I was doing some sub-consulting for them off and on. And then one of the smart mobility lead at the time kind of came to me with that idea. I was like, Corey, what do you think about if we teamed up? Could we actually do what you're doing, but at scale? And so we started brainstorming it and gave it a shot. And
are these tools documents, or are they software tools, or both?
They're both. Yeah, there's a lot of documents and templates, and but there's also some digital tools as well, some analysis tools, and like ODD. We teamed up with a couple really cool companies, and Andy was actually our lead again, Andy Smart. But Andy and I kind of conceived of this ODD assessment, risk assessment, and hazard assessment that we could then do for cities or any application. But we teamed up with D-Risk and StreetScope, took their data and their analysis and kind of coordinated everything, and then could provide a quantified risk assessment with edge cases identified. So, and I know you've met the D-Risk folks, and but really great tool, and I'm continuing to use it. I think it's a great method to identify the risks within an ODD. We did it at the Jacksonville project, the Vegas project, and we did it for the state of Michigan way back when, right before the pandemic. So that was like a half of an assessment.
Yeah.
But
interesting. So this tool can basically, it sounds like a kind of an attempt towards bridging that gap that we just talked about between ODD and capabilities. And would it identify autonomous capabilities that were required for a particular environment? So, okay.
And
so then, like, you have to deal with traffic lights, or you have to deal with this or that, or.
Yeah.
Michigan lefts.
It would define the entire ODD, but it would also then provide an analysis of the hazards in the edge cases, and then we would kind of could have a quantified risk assessment, and we could look at the risk in a couple different ways. One, we could look, as the engineering consulting company, we could say, are there infrastructure risks that we can take care of? Are there blind spots and occlusions and things like that? And we could look at the digital infrastructure and make sure that we have proper connectivity and redundancy. And we could look at the operations. Is this a high risk area, this intersection or this crosswalk? Why is it? Because we would actually have the data. It's like a lot of people, we found this in Vegas, is the homeless people they followed their own traffic patterns, essentially pedestrian patterns. And we were able to identify what those were, which was great for us, but it was also great for the city. Is that we had documented frequencies of they didn't use the crosswalk, they crossed from here to here regularly, or they did it. It was really interesting seeing the data. Is that there were traffic patterns like from 2 a.m. to 2:45 a.m. There was an abnormal number of pedestrians in this area. It's Vegas. Who knows? But we had the data to show it, and then what we could do. So then we could look at operational elements. Do we need to do something with the signage, or reduce the speed, or put in a speed bump here? Whatever those mitigation things might be, and then ultimately we could then give the data to the autonomous vehicle company, so they could identify. They could essentially test to the edge cases that we identified as well. So I think it's a pretty comprehensive tool. It's going to evolve just like autonomy. 5 years from now, it's going to be wildly better than it is today, but it's a pretty good starting point. And I think it's a good example of like the things that we're trying to do is just support and accelerate the technology and help as much as we can with the programmatic elements. And so that's what we're doing. So we did that for 3 years with Stantec, and it was pretty cool. We were making progress, but it just again was kind of a people thing. We weren't really taking off the way I hoped, and so we left there this summer. And I actually just signed with Arcadis, which is a similar company, but and it was the original person who brought me into Stantec. He had gone over to Arcadis, and so we're doing a 2.0 version now with and Arcadis is very much like Stantec. They're a little bit bigger. I think they consider themselves one of the top ITS companies in the world. But anyway, it's great. It's a cool company. I love that they have this idea of taking this tiny little company like ours, this little innovative AV company, and working with us to try to scale our processes and tools globally through their systems.
So it's interesting. So this tool sort of generates, information that says for the automation, so it sort of absorbs the ODD and the application, and it says here are the things that this particular, the AVs need to handle in this environment. So you give that to an autonomy company.
And we can give it to them. We can give them the data so they can test in simulation.
So they can test in simulation.
So
I guess using a particular simulation tool, or is it just?
I think they're pretty universal. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
So, but now let's say, you've got to go 35 miles an hour in this zone, and it's one of these. It's a low speed vehicle or something, and it's a different it's a bespoke shuttle or something, and they can only go a certain speed. Whatever the situation is, whatever the limitation is. If you give them, if there's a capability and there's a limitation, is there an iterative process where you say, okay, well, this shuttle for phase one is going to go down a different route. It's not going to go down this 35 mile an hour road, or it's,
I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't think you are. We worked on a project. You're explaining exactly what I did at Fort Carson.
Okay.
And so they had some visions. So so your listeners know, you did a pilot at Fort Carson for Joint Base for the joint base there, and did a pilot. And Katie and I were actually on the team as advisors in the early days. And as we did a kind of a light ODD assessment with them. And one of the things that we were really adamant about is speed differential. Is they wanted vehicles, autonomous vehicles, to go on these roads that were going 35, 45 miles per hour. But we did a little bit of an assessment and collected some data, and we found even like on the 35-mile-an-hour road, the average speed was something like 43 average, because it's young military people going home, going to work and going home from work. And we're like, you cannot, it's just too dangerous. So we essentially gave them a risk assessment, and we were pretty forceful and adamant about, do not do that. You've got to stick to these kind of inner roads that have a maximum speed limit of 25 miles per hour, and people follow it pretty closely, but as you found, they probably still had a lot of differential. But yeah, you just described exactly some of the stuff that we do from time to time, where we do feasibility studies. So that's part of the feasibility study, to say it's too risky. It's it's right now.
It seems like that has to precede, because it should drive the requirements, right? Because sometimes it happens after the fact, and that's bad. Like in some cases, like for example, we work with buses and vehicles that go, 40, 45, 55 miles an hour, in terms of, they can go physically faster, but, if a customer chooses, a low speed vehicle, like there was the GEM vehicles that, the vehicles themselves are physically limited to 25 miles per hour. That's their FMVSS rating. And then there's some of those bespoke shuttles that, they might be able to go 25, but they go slower to meet certain NHTSA requirements, I guess, right, for operating in certain domains. And so I don't know what that is, but there's something that should drive the selection, ahead of time. So these tools, I think, would be very useful, even pre RFP.
Actually, another good example of that one is, so it was pre-RFP with Fort Carson, and then another one is your project in Hawaii. Is that we did the same thing? Is that let them know, because I did ODD analysis for that project as well, and it was the same thing. They wanted the vehicles to operate at 35-mile-an-hour roads, and I drew alternative routes for them that weren't as fast. And I said, or if you're going to go on 35 mile an hour, I think the only one that can do it is probably Perone, which is okay. Just letting them know, because they had in mind that it was going to be like an Ollie or an Easy Mile shuttle, and I was letting them know, like, you just can't do it. And they're like, well, it's okay if it only runs at 25. It won't run at 25. They'll run at 12. So I've done a lot of that stuff too.
It's interesting for autonomous vehicles because they, we have to make them go the speed limit. We're kind of, you have to do that, but you are driving in environments, obviously, where there are human beings who are going to go faster and get frustrated, right? Because the vehicle's driving the speed limit. What do you do, So what are the edge cases for, I'm sorry, I'm just saying, like, what are the edge cases there? Of course, you've got people aggressive drivers who are, going to cut, maybe try to cut you off, right? Because they get angry.
One thing that's kind of interesting is once we do these testings in operation. One thing that was kind of interesting with a pilot, I think they may have been using the Easy Mile. It was either Easy Mile or Navia, and I'm not saying there was anything wrong with the vehicles, but it was an interesting operational use case and kind of how it interacts with public drivers. Is that one of the pilots in Minnesota, they were finding when the vehicle was turning right, and it was turning right slowly, other drivers were going around it and turning right around it at intersections, which is crazy behavior that just, we don't see in the wild when it's other, human drivers with human drivers. So that was a really kind of fascinating thing, is that people were just impatient. Like, this little thing's going too slow. And so they would make a single right-hand turn lane into a double, and on a whim. So it's
interesting. I mean, if people know it's an autonomous vehicle, because like obviously if it's one of those interesting looking shuttles, you know it's something unique and it's autonomous, or if there's signs that say autonomous vehicle.
Yeah.
And certainly people were familiar with the ones cruising around San Francisco and Arizona, because they've got the sensors and the logos.
Yeah.
But like so when they know it's an autonomous vehicle, yeah, it definitely it can produce behaviors, malicious
Yeah.
or otherwise that the vehicles, you have to plan for and you have to deal with, above and beyond just, of course, driving down these roads. People were putting cones on the
Yeah.
cruise vehicles and trying to foil them, and
yeah, this is
yeah.
something I've been talking about probably since our first pilots and demos, for well over 10 years, is that especially Americans, but humans bully robots. And not just those old videos of them kicking, Boston Dynamics videos where they're kicking the big dog. But it's happened. I mean, machines, they're not humans. We don't really, it's kind of an American culture where, where we don't love robots. All of our movies are about robots taking over. Where you see also, because I've worked with Japanese companies and one Chinese company, but especially in Japan, robots are usually heroes in their culture, and or at least it has been in their media, their entertainment. And we found that to be the case when we were doing pilots. Is people just they'll walk in front of them, they don't care, they'll essentially bully them, and we saw that, like you said, putting the cones was a great example. So I that's one thing that I've talked about off and on, is that we have to plan for that. And you see that in the little sidewalk delivery robots where people kick them over, steal them, try to trick them, throw things over top of them. It's just all the abuse that those little delivery robots have taken in the last few years.
Well, that drives, I think, sort of the thought processes earlier too about how long it's going to take for robotaxis to become, commercially scaled at a level where it's a profitable business. It could be a while, and I mean, in my opinion, but who knows? But controlled environments, right? You by definition have more control over that. You have geofenced. You can define what's going to happen better and know. Military bases, perfect example where you can generally, know the what's going to happen and confine the ODD a little bit. So just a couple more things, I guess. Commercialization is a big deal, and I think part of the reason for some of the pushback against autonomy from investors and in the last couple years or more, and I think we've seen a decline to some extent in investment and certainly valuations for some of these autonomy companies, is what's the path to revenue, right? When are you gonna start making money? Is this profitable? And it goes back to the cash thing. I mean, are you just going to live on cash from investors, or are you going to have cash from revenue? And I guess, what do you think are some of the? I mean, maybe you've touched on it. It's part of it is the operational design domain. There, the geofenced applications where you can have autonomy sooner. But are there any other commercialization strategies, broadly speaking, that you think will help make AVs more successful moving forward here?
I don't think anything that I maybe haven't already said. Just it's demand of that's the trucking world is first is finding where the problems are and then working to solve them with autonomy. If there's a problem that can be solved with autonomy, and there's a business case, that. So I think I kind of touched on that a bit, but it's making me think of the trucking industry and how aggressive they're being, but because there's such a need. It's because our logistics environment and ecosystem is really strained. I just heard recently that we have a short of 160,000 truck drivers in the U.S. A few years ago I heard it was 100, and then I heard just somebody, I don't know, don't quote me, I don't know if it's a real number or not, but we know that there's a shortage. So if autonomy can take some of that load that it can handle in the near term, whatever that load is, and some people believe it's the long haul missions, and we can let the humans drive, the more complex, the things that, where they can go home at night, where they're going to want to be truck drivers. There's an application there. And then of course, I mentioned really early in our conversation is what the military was looking at was things that were dull, dirty, and dangerous. So they were investing heavily in trucking because truck convoys are, a continual target. They're,
Sure.
They don't move that fast. They're not like a jet or a Black Hawk. They're moving at 50, 60 miles per hour, and there's 30 of them. So pretty easy target.
Yeah.
So that made sense for them.
I could definitely see, the application for military, but I guess I've had a question. I want to get your perspective on this with trucks. And it's funny, my wife's grandmother, when they used to drive on I-81, which is, just typical busy highway here in Virginia. There was always a lot of trucks, and every time a truck would go by, she would go, "Ooh," she would kind of, she was very nervous.
Excited. Oh,
very nervous. No, nervous. Like, this big truck's going by. And of course, you're driving there with your, imagine, driving on a big highway with your family, and there's an autonomous truck next to you. And if any little thing goes wrong, I mean, it's a lot of mass, speed. So there's massive inertia, and there could be massive damage, right? Yeah. Massive catastrophe. What are your thoughts on the adaptability by, the adoption for trucking, given, the public and the interaction with the public? Are there going to have to be other constraints provided around the autonomous trucking space? Will it just be platooning, in other words, or will it be, will they have their own lanes to make it practical, or are they going to just let them coexist with people with their families going on vacation on the road?
Yeah, I know all of it's being explored. Platooning, isolated lanes, and just full integration. And I'm guessing it's going to be full integration, and I think it's going to be ODD dependent again. And there's areas where it is just a straight open road for 500 miles or whatever it is. It's relatively simple. It's mainly logistics traffic on that road. I think it's going to be just integrated as is. I think if it's a little more complex environment, maybe you're getting into a downtown area or just a heavily populated and trafficked area, that may be an isolated lane that's going to make sense for that section. But it's a great question, because we're not really sure, right? Because we're just in testing and pilots, and mainly, I mean, most of the work is happening, in Texas, with a little bit of extension, into Arizona, and I don't know, is California still doing it? I'm trying to remember if they kind of put the kibosh on or made it tough for autonomous trucking. But I know Texas is really the hot spot right now.
Yeah.
There's wide open roads in, some sections.
Yeah, I mean, I love to see the innovation, but it just seems like that's an application for autonomy where there's almost zero room for error.
Yeah.
Almost zero, because as soon as there's anything that goes wrong there, that's going to be a big one, right? And it's unfortunate. You want to see the productivity. Obviously, you want to see it be safe, but there's, again, you just got to dot all I's and cross T's, and there's still the non-determinism of environments.
Yeah.
I was thinking of, sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't even remember what I was going to say. I was just reinforcing what you were saying. It's just, I agree.
I was thinking of of an edge case recently. I gave a talk to at NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, and I was just thinking of weather environments, and what's the first driverless vehicle going to do, like in Florida where you live, when it's driving down a road and there's a tornado ahead? Is it going to drive right into the tornado?
Yeah.
Are they planning for those edge cases?
Tornadoes, that's a good question. I don't know if they're planning for tornadoes. I know they're planning, I know companies that have been doing well with planning for heavy rain and heavy snow. I don't know tornado hasn't been on within the
I know
yet.
It's a weird question, right? But it's an edge case, right? But in Florida, those are more common. I mean, I used to live down in Florida for 3 years, and I drove through, water spouts and things.
I think the key is everything's going to be supervised, right? At least in the next couple decades. Human is going to supervise the fleet. And if there are weather warnings, the human will have oversight. But it's also really easy to, send a weather warning to an autonomous vehicle to say, hey, there is a tornado warning in your area, and now you have a protocol for it. If I am within a zone of a tornado warning, I safely pull over and wait until I get the all clear from the human again. I think that's likely how it's going to be handled. But I was kind of thinking also back to, we have to do a lot of human operations, which is great. And I love that part of it, is we are prone to error, but we're also, we know what we're doing when it comes to things like that, of like, we can supervise the operation. Even when you're thinking about trucking, I would love to see, and I know a lot of companies are thinking about it, but I don't know exactly their strategy, but trucking through the night, because a lot of the things that we're talking about also in those small utility applications, like mow the lawn at the airport at night. And usually can't do that, or it's not. They don't want to do that. I mean, they do have lights on a lot of those rigs, but if the airport's kind of shut down, it's in very slow operations from midnight to 5 a.m. Go do what you have to do with robots. They don't care if it's dark out. Right.
That's right.
Long haul trucking. Make them do they'll just drive through the night where there's almost no traffic. I'm simplifying it, but
no, that's a very good point. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Have these vehicles drive in, off peak hours and take advantage of that. And because they can see at night, whereas that's more difficult for some human beings, especially myself.
I was just in San Francisco a couple of days ago, and it fascinated me with this just the city, how cities operate. Is that during the day I was going to meetings, and there was almost nobody on the streets. There was very light traffic, very light pedestrian traffic, and then kind of after dinner I went out, and it's the same thing. I walked to dinner and then back to my hotel, and it was packed. The streets were packed, the sidewalks were packed. Everybody's out after work. And the city was alive. And then I left for the airport at 4 a.m. and it was just dead quiet. I saw like 2 blocks away, somebody crossed the street, and, it was 3 minutes before I saw another car, and another 3 minutes before the next car came. It was my Uber. It's, we have ODD, it's like conditional ODDs almost that we can take advantage of in these early days. Hopefully, with some applications, not all.
Well, teleop too. You talk about supervised operations. I mean, teleoperation and kind of, having the human drop in when there is a situation like a tornado or just there's a protest in the streets, and what are you going to do? Whatever the situation may be. And there's passengers on board, or precious cargo, you're going to want to have some sort of human supervision.
Yeah, it'd be nice when we have those warnings, like simple things like that. Whether if it's just simple construction, or it's a protest, or it's something. I mean, just in the connected vehicle realm, to be able to know that this road isn't really passable, or maybe it's less than desirable. So, we can use that in our human-driven vehicles, but it'll be great also when all that information is passed along to the autonomous vehicles.
And it goes back to giving, there's always people always talk about the safety benefits of autonomy, but there's certain, and people do talk about the giving time back. To me, that's a big thing, right? If I can get into a vehicle and do work or take a nap or whatever it is, I don't care as much that it's going to take me an extra 15 minutes to get to my destination.
Yeah.
Because
I don't mind. We have such a horrible train system here, but when I'm in Europe and being able to take the train everywhere, it's so great. I don't, like you said, maybe I could drive it in 2 hours and it takes 2.5 on the train. I don't care. You can get up and walk around, you can work, you can nap, just your time is yours, at least in that space. I totally agree. That's been our I think most of us, the first vision is safety. We can't tolerate 40,000 deaths in the U.S. every year from traffic accidents and the billions of dollars in damage and all that stuff. But to me, the second one is kind of convenience and getting time back. That would be an amazing future. I'm hoping that we realize this, in the next couple of decades, so we can really take advantage of it.
Right. It's also mobility for people who can't drive or who can extend their, they may have a medical situation, they can't get to the doctor or the pharmacy as easily, and now they can, with automated transportation, if or just an increase, right? If be it their own vehicle or some sort of ride hailed vehicle.
Yeah.
So
that's where we started. That was our first project with the Department of Defense, was a medical campus shuttle at Fort Bragg. So I've probably done 3 or 4 projects that were specifically about accessibility, and that was one of the first ones. Yeah, or it was the first one.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, this has been, it's always a great conversation, talking about different facets of autonomy, and you've had such a long, extended career in the space, a lot of different facets, and so you bring certainly a well-rounded perspective to all this. I mean, any guidance for younger folks or just anybody who's wanting to get involved in this space? It's a question I commonly like to ask, because everybody I talk to comes into autonomy from a different world, and you've had a fascinating journey into the world of autonomy. So any advice for folks, maybe even for folks who are in the military now or in college, trying to figure out, how do I do this? How do I get involved?
I do, because I do talk to quite a few people, and it always starts on essentially, what do you want to do? Where's their training, their interests? Are they an electrical engineer? Are they a programmer? Or are they more of an operations person? Because there's jobs for all of us. And then what we're going to see in the next few years is we're going to start to see scaling. We're going to start to see companies that have 3 vehicles out are going to have 30, then 300. And for some applications, especially even some of these off-road geofenced applications, that I know of companies that are getting hundreds of orders, or orders for hundreds of vehicles, I should say. And with the potential to break into the thousands, who knows how long that'll take. But I mean, it's a full ecosystem. It's not just computer programmers that are needed. It's not just engineers. It's not just technicians. It's a pretty robust ecosystem. So I always start there. If you're interested in the tech, that's the starting point. Then what are you interested in? My son is a good example. I'm hoping to bring my son into our company this year, and he loves drones. He's a drone pilot, but he is a construction.
You froze, Corey.
Project manager, project engineer for construction. So he's got those great skills. And a couple of the companies we're working with have autonomous products that apply to the construction industry. So he'll be a great project manager in that space.
Well, that's fantastic. You also have, advice for customers and a lot of information for potential customers through Aribo AV, as you mentioned. Is it ariboav.com.
Yep.
I'll put the website up. And so that's what's pretty much occupying your life day to day here, right? With your daughter Katie and I'm sure others involved. So that sounds like a fascinating work, and I'm sure we'll be crossing paths many times at many conferences. And I'm jealous that you're down in Florida, though. I got to have an excuse to come down this time of year to Florida.
Oh yeah, it's today. I went outside. It's insanely beautiful. It's like 78 degrees and sunny, and all family and friends back in Michigan. They are in pain.
Well, I'm heading, like I said, north to Michigan in a few weeks. So I'm sure I'll be going during a cold spell. Well, again, thank you, Corey, for your time, your insights here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
It's always a blast, and I just appreciate everything that you do, and again, your time spent here today on the podcast.
I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the show Driven with me, Paul Perrone, your host. Don't forget to check us out at driven.show on the web, and give us a thumbs up or subscribe here if you like the show. Thank you for listening in. See you soon.